Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Oakland Bay Junior High School here for tonight's town hall with 35th District Representatives Dan Griffey and Drew MacEwen. This is going to be the only time during session that you're going to get a chance to ask these guys questions. And again, there are note cards in the back, and we'll go through those after we get a little bit of an update with things that are going on. My name's Jeff Slakey. I'm the station manager at IFIBERONE News Radio, KMAS, host the Daybreak Show in the morning. And I'm fortunate to have these guys come on the air during session weekly. Let's see. So, Drew, you're on Wednesdays. Dan was on this morning with me. And so we'll talk about things that are going on. Before we get things started, I would like everybody to stand if available. We got the flag here, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. So once again, we're 2 weeks away from the end of this short legislative session in Olympia. And these two great gentlemen here from the 35th have been representing you well there. And so tonight we're just going to get a chance to talk with them a little bit more about what's been happening in the state capitol, and then give a chance for you to ask some questions or share some ideas and things like that. So thank you guys for being here. I know you had a long night last night, and Dan, I know you were on the air with me bright and early this morning. So we'll start with you. Just kind of give us an overview of what you think has been happening in Olympia, and then I've got some things that we'll talk about as well.
Well, welcome all. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I want to say in the beginning, it's an honor and a privilege to serve in Olympia for you. It was a hard road for me to get there, and I tell you what, every second that I am there, I cherish it, and I work very hard for you. Just a little background, I serve on the local government committee, which is kind of rules and regulations that your local government has to follow. The early learning committee, early learning and human services committee, which deals with K-12 issues, more foster care issues, and how do we deal with child abuse and child neglect and those sort of things. So that's kind of in our purview. And the Public Safety Committee. The Public Safety Committee is all the laws that you have to follow, so crime and punishment in Washington State. A lot of them have, they all have really interesting subject matters to deal with. We deal with such a myriad of problems and issues, and the fixes are all over the map because all of us have a different idea on how to fix it, or fix any problem that they come up with. And my strategy is to do town halls, do forums, do the poll like I did in the beginning of the year. If all of you, or most of you, should have received a mailer that I want to know what your priorities were. And to that end, you said you wanted us to honor the $30 car tabs by a pretty overwhelming majority. You said you wanted to lower property taxes, at least the state's portion of the property taxes. You said you didn't want to ban guns at about 55%. You didn't want to ban gun magazines and those sort of things. And you said mental health is a real deal in Washington State, and we got to do something serious about it and take it very seriously. And to that end, I've sponsored bills to do a lot of those. On the mental health issue, I didn't sponsor what I wanted to do because Senator Steve O'Ban had exactly what I would like to do for our mental health and substance abuse problem in Washington State. And in that, I think all of you were also very clear. We can't just allow people and just look the other way to say, you have a mental health issue and a substance issue. We're going to just step over you while you're laying on the sidewalk. You want us to do something way more definitive. And Senator O'Ban's bill was doing that. That bill was defeated. We couldn't get it out. So now we go back to the drawing board and we start working on a very much more robust bill that actually has deliverables built back into it. On the taxes, Representative MacEwen and I sponsored 2 bills to give you back some of your hard-earned money because the state right now is flush. about $2.4 billion because you guys are working really hard and you're paying your taxes. So we wanted to give $1 billion back, and we wanted to honor the car tab vote that you took. And that car tab vote, that bill, the first bill that we sponsored, would honor the car tab vote. We would do $30 car tabs. We would backfill out of the general fund all of those monies that would be lost. And so the general fund would then take the hit. And then we would reduce taxes across the board on products that people use every day. And those taxes, really, when you look at what they are, they're more medical seeming and medical-like. We really should eliminate the taxes on those issues. So I'll quit talking right now and do more question and answers later. Thank you so much for your time.
Drew?
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks IFIBERONE for doing this tonight. I think it's great for folks that don't want to make the trek out tonight or can't. So appreciate your partnering with us on this, and thank you for everyone that's come out here tonight. I appreciate it. It's always good to get in front of you and more importantly hear what's on your mind, your thoughts and concerns, and that's really what drives things. And frankly, some of the best legislation that I've done has come from constituents, and it's real everyday issues that you're dealing with, and you share that with us, and we're able to enact legislation that addresses those, and that's been some of the key things over the years that I've really enjoyed. Both Dan and I serve in our caucus leadership, so we're busy with that. In addition to that, I'm the assistant ranking member on appropriations, which is our operating budget writing committee. And we were late last night in passing that out of the House Appropriations Committee, and we'll vote that off the House floor tomorrow and talk a little bit more about that in a minute. In addition to that, I'm the ranking member on Commerce and Gaming, and as I like to say, that's the Vice Squad. It deals with alcohol, tobacco, gambling, and some commerce issues. And it's a fun committee because it's not so much partisan. Everybody seems to have their own algorithm as to when, why, and why not. And so it's a fun committee because there really aren't partisan lines with it, and we take some interesting votes in that. And one of them this year is sports betting, which is making its way, and I think that will be signed into law this year. The Senate has passed that through its committee, and I suspect that they will pass it off the Senate floor, and we can talk more about that in a little bit too. But my main focus down there is dealing with things related to the budget, and you can look at this chart later, probably a little easier to see it up close, but when I came into office, I was elected in 2012, and so my first year was 2013. Our operating budget was $34 billion. It is now $54 billion, and that is a tremendous increase in a relatively short period of time. And as Dan alluded to, we have a tremendous surplus happening right now. We have record revenues, and that has, on one hand, that's made the budget process easier for the House and Senate to get along on because both sides can essentially get what they want and not have to scramble too hard. But I think what's been lost in that is that this is your money, and while there's a lot of good things in the budget, I think one of the things that's been forgotten about is you, the taxpayer, and that should always be first and foremost. And we've put ourselves in a position that we can't weather a storm when one comes. There's a natural economic cycle that always is going to happen, and we're going to go through the booms, we're going to go through the bust, and it's not a question of if, but when. And if you pay attention to the markets, this week has been quite a turmoil, and two key companies that directly affect state revenues in the state are Boeing and Microsoft, and both of them are having issues. And we've just passed a budget that doesn't put us in a position to be able to weather any kind of storm, and there are clouds on the horizon. Again, I hope that it's further off, but we're not in a position to be able to handle it. Our ending fund balance on the budget that we just passed is $70 million. A lot of money to you and me, but put that into context, that's the equivalent of somebody making $100,000 a year having $125 in savings for an emergency. That's where we are as a state. We do have, in addition to that, our rainy day fund, which is $2.8 billion. That'll fund state government for 18 days. So when we go through these economic cycles, and we've put ourselves, or we've spent every last dime, we've put ourselves in a position where we have two options. That's the cut safety nets, which are the very things that you need when you have a recession, or raise taxes, which is the worst possible thing to do when you have a recession. But that's the position the state has put itself in. I'll be making that argument on the House floor tomorrow, that this budget is not sustainable. And unfortunately, I only have 2 copies, but you're more than welcome to look at it, take it with you. If you've ever wanted to see how $54 billion is spent, you can look at the summary version, or you can read it line by line. And if you really want to know how state government works, it's pretty incredible. So look forward to your questions and where you guys are at and what's on your mind, and we'll go from there.
Well, let's keep on the budget topic and move to the transportation budget here and the $30 car tabs. Dan, you and I talked this morning about some of the movement you guys have been able to make in the House and the Senate on keeping those as the will of the voters have moved through. And one of the things that we talked about was any potential impact on projects impacting the 35th. What are some of the ways that you're helping to explain in Olympia how the 35th needs a lot of these projects to continue on? That freight corridor up in Belfair has some key components up into Kitsap and Bremerton and the Basin, things like that. Is that, again, one of those that you had heard about being perhaps on the chopping block to be put on the 7-month moratorium by the governor, or where are we at with those types of issues here on the 35th?
Well, the first part of your question was how do we increase awareness about the freight corridor and put pressure on them? I tell the people that write the transportation budget, have you ever seen pitchforks and torches? Because if the people of North Mason don't get the promised bypass, that's what's going to happen. We were promised, I lived there, we were promised it in the nickel tax, we were promised it in the dime tax, and at this point in time, we don't have any patience for it not happening. The current budget as that has been floated, the transportation budget, had a fractional reduction, small reduction in the Highway 3 freight corridor, which was disappointing. However, in reconciliation, the Senate budget fully funds it at the levels that, and I am confident that we can get it fully funded at that level. I'm confident that we're going to get a transportation budget out that doesn't affect all of our projects. And we have, at the last check, we have like 13 projects in the 35th district, pretty significant projects. And we'll protect those, I'm pretty sure. But it's always a fight. It's a constant fight. Every district has their passion and their love and the thing that they have to have. And so it's up to us to make sure we elevate all of your voices out here to make sure that they happen. So thank you.
And Drew, on this one that you helped to get through the committee last night, talk to me a little bit about that process and working with the majority through this session in the House, and then as it moves over into the Senate.
Sure. And real quick, if you've got questions and cards, Rob Barnes and Amber, Oliver. Sorry, Amber. They'll collect them and get them up to Jeff, and we'll get those answered. So on the operating budgets, we have 3 budgets in the state: the operating budget, transportation budget, and the capital budget. And one way to look at that from a household standpoint, the transportation budget, that speaks for itself. You know what that is. The capital budget is our infrastructure, very similar to you probably carry a mortgage on your house. We fund the capital budget with cash, but also with bonds, so we do carry debt. And then on the operating budget, that is our day-to-day operations of the state. And we're required under our state constitution to have a balanced budget. We do not operate it at a deficit. We're not like the federal government. So the operating budget does pay the bond interest on the capital budget. Very similar. So if you have a house mortgage and you pay your mortgage from your regular income, similar type of structure. So the capital budget and the transportation budget are much more collaborative between the two parties because they require bonding votes, and that takes a 2/3 vote in both chambers, and so you have to work together regardless of who's in charge, and so you have to have buy-in from both sides. The operating budget, not so much. It's a simple majority to pass because there's not any bonding involved, and so it's not as collaborative as the other two budgets. So being in the minority, it's we're oftentimes left out of that process, but you have to be able to develop those relationships and be able to work with both sides of the aisle to ensure that the things that are important to our district are taken care of. And a lot of that just comes down to building those relationships over time. And as we worked through the process, and last night we offered a number of amendments, and a fair number of them were accepted. And it's just the nature of that process. The chair writes the budget primarily, excuse me, and we offer a ton of amendments then on the night of passage, and you got to build that support. So we got a number of them for law enforcement, which is very important, including a vendor rate increase that they haven't had in a number of years to deal with issues that we mandate that they do, and yet we've neglected over the years to increase the payment on that. So I was glad to get that one through, and also increasing funding on our criminal justice system for recruiting more officers with diverse backgrounds to better represent the areas that they would ultimately patrol. We were able to get that through. And then specifically, something of interest to this area is, and this gets a little wonky, but a number of years ago, the feds removed universal service fee off of phone bills. And what that goes back decades, and it had to do with rural areas like this to make sure that we had communications. And the feds decided to end that funding and left that up to the states. And we hadn't fully funded that in our last biennium budget, and that was a heavy lift last night. But we got that through. It was a $6 million appropriation, which again, a lot of money, but in the context of $54 billion, not a lot. But that would have a direct impact on all of our constituents if that wasn't to happen. Those are a couple of examples. But again, it's just building those relationships and working across the aisle to make sure your interests are represented. And we got a number of things done that'll affect rural Washington in a positive way.
We've already got a handful of questions here, so we'll go right into some of these. I've seen a lot on social media, and I know there was just the levy that a lot of folks voted on here in the 35th, and now people are seeing and commenting about their property taxes. And the question here is, can you tell us about the property tax costs as we see them today? Either one of you.
Sure. So yeah, not a pleasant experience opening the mail the last week or so with your property tax bill, and we have seen those dramatically go up. Part of that's due to an increase in assessed values, and part of that is due to the way we changed the funding formula for schools. That was part of the McCleary decision, and we had an opportunity, we've had a number of opportunities in the legislature to directly reduce the state portion of the property tax levy that would pay for schools, because we've had significant revenue. But frankly, the majority party chose not to do that. And now we are in this situation where you're getting bills that, while the state's enjoying tremendous fruits of your labor, you're in a situation, a lot of people are in a situation where they're getting a tax bill that is blowing them out of the water. And we've had plenty of opportunities to reduce that, and I'm disappointed that they've chosen not to go that route. So there are a couple of portions that direct schools. You have the levy that's directly levied by the school district in which you live, and then you have the state portion that is to fund basic education. This was part of the McCleary decision, was that levies done by school districts, there was an over-reliance on those levies for basic education. Our state constitution requires the state to fully fund basic education, and so this debate went on for a number of years to define basic education. We've done that. So now out of that, we have the context in which to fund it. And there was a disparity across the state on property values, and so a student in Shelton was not getting the same dollar amount as the child on Mercer Island. And through the levy process, in theory, that's made that more equal. I would not say that it is entirely equal, but it's made it more equal. But we've chosen, the legislature has chosen to let those levies go up tremendously. I am pleased last night, one of the other major amendments, and I should have mentioned this, that we got through on the budget, will provide $300,000 in levy assistance to the Shelton School District. That was a significant accomplishment last night. That's one of the school districts that have been adversely affected through this process. And again, $300,000, not a lot, but it is. So we're providing some levy relief there, and we're going to continue to do that. But we've had the opportunities, and I've proposed a property tax relief bill for senior citizens, and there just has not been a desire to move those forward, and that is unfortunate.
Yeah, and thank you. And Drew, starting out, you take the thunder away from the next person. But I'd like to say we're about 375,000 single-family units shy right now in Washington State to meet the need of the citizens. So a lot of the reason why your value has gone up so much is there's no inventory. And so when there's no inventory, then supply and demand takes a hold, and all of our property values go up. So if we leverage that money, we could borrow against it, or we could sell it, and we could get a lot of money. The downside is your rate because is based on the actual value of your house, and that actual value has gone through the roof. And it's quite frankly, it's a supply and demand issue. On housing right now, we're not. Our policies are actually making it very hard to build, and we're working on ways that we can make it easier to build, reduce the regulatory burden, reduce the tax burden, to encourage people to build single-family houses, so we don't have that supply shortage. If we do that, then you'll see some market stabilization. You'll probably see the pressure for those values go up. And then the other thing is, people move into the development areas, more people are paying the taxes, so it's spread over a larger amount of people. But we sponsored a bill. The majority party, I don't think, is even going to hear, but bill is 2954, which would do direct property tax relief on the state's portion of the property taxes. We believe because the state is experiencing a windfall, we need to share the wealth, and we need to share it with the people on the ground. So, I first talked about the car tabs. That was one way we could save you money, and sales tax relief. Well, the other way is direct property tax relief. And I feel your pain. I'm very frustrated at the rate and the appetite that the majority party is wanting taxes. Drew and I ask them, can't we just pause for a little while? Can't our constituents just have a break for a minute? But we're going to continue to put pressure on them. The bill Drew was talking about, that for seniors, is at a certain age, or certain amount of years paying taxes, freeze your taxes there. That way, that respects the fact that you've been paying taxes for your whole life, and it's time to really give significant relief and freeze your taxes at a certain level until that home is then sold. He's been trying to get that bill passed for years. I am happy to help him in that effort, and I think it's a good effort. Other states have done it, and I think it's a good direction to go for us.
We talked a little bit about some of these in the next question, but can you guys tell us about projects that are currently being approved for Mason County and the rest of the 35th? I think you mentioned maybe 13 or so, if there's some specifics on.
Yeah, so the capital budget, this was a heavy lift, and I'm glad that we were able to get this done. It's actually, for a supplemental budget, we do a biennium budget, if you're not aware, so we do a budget for 2 years, and we're in the outline year right now, and so this is our supplemental budget. You make midstream corrections based on revenue forecasts, caseload forecasts, and with the capital budget, you have a little bit of money, maybe projects that weren't ready. That money comes back into the state, and you can reallocate it to other projects. And through the years, I've learned where to look for those things, because in supplemental budgets, you generally don't have a lot for projects. If you're lucky to get a couple of smaller projects for your district, that might be $50,000 for a kitchen for a homeless shelter and things like that. And that's about the extent that you can get in a supplemental budget, as opposed to the regular budget, where we can do multi-million-dollar projects like where we've put a lot of money. We put $11 million in last year towards the North Mason sewer, and getting that more stabilized. That was a heavy lift, and that was in the regular year. So put into context, you can typically only do about $40,000 or $50,000 in a supplemental year. I knew where to look, and worked with the relationships I have, and Dan was very supportive of this, and it's actually it's the third largest project in the state for the supplemental year, and that was $750,000 for the Y that's going on right back there, which I think is going to have a tremendous impact on our city and our community. So that was a huge one. And then Dan alluded to the transportation ones. I'll let you So I don't take all the thunder. You can have the lightning.
Yeah, so as far as transportation goes, the 35th has I believe 12 to 13 projects, and they range all the way from Lynch Road all the way to near Silverdale, and those of you that go to Silverdale by Chico Creek, there's going to be some significant traffic problems for the next 2 years. They're rebuilding a bridge that goes across Chico Creek, but it's seismic retrofit, and we get a cost benefit of the salmon spawning grounds now will be opened. And it's not just salmon that we're fixing. Because of the logs and the silt come down, it floods quite often. So that project's ongoing. The Coffee Creek you saw down here, that is going to look more like a diamond intersection. That one, we received the rest of the funding to make sure that project is finished. And just a lot of projects along, up and down. Highway 3 resurfacing in several areas is going to happen in this calendar year. But one of the big victories we got is we believe we got in the transportation budget a removal of a payback that the WSP would be entitled to if somebody hooks up to the Shelton water system that went to the State Patrol Academy. The big win here is that's a $2.5 million economic boon to the city of Shelton and the surrounding areas, because in latecomer agreements, that's what those agreements are called. The first person that hooks up to that water line has to pay half. So the first person that hooks up is going to have to pay $1.7 million to hook up to water. Well, that's kind of ridiculous. The state can pick up the tab, and we didn't book that money anywhere in the budget, so we didn't lose anything. We paid for the water to be put out to State Patrol Academy, and all of us can benefit from that with our economic development here. So that isn't a project, but I think it's going to result in a lot of projects in the future. Shelton Hills could probably now really start talking about getting off the ground and whatnot. So very proud to get that done, and that was just asking them to tear up a piece of paper. Anyway, thank you.
This questioner says, I am concerned about the impact of state laws that are impacting the safety of students and staff in the schools. There seems to be an increase of students with trauma entering school. What can be done to ensure the safety of the majority of a class so the students don't have to be evacuated from their classrooms?
You go first, or
Sure. I think there's a couple things on that, so I'll take one of them, and you can take the other one. So this past year, OSPI, which is the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, by rule, essentially mandated what a teacher can and can't do in a disciplinary situation with students. And met with a number of teachers yesterday at the Capitol, and this came up, and this has come up from administrators to school board members to teachers. And you have a kid, and I mean, this is from kindergarten on up. You have a kid that's misbehaving, and their hands are tied. They're the only solution that is allowed under current state rule is for the teacher then to take the rest of the class and leave the classroom and leave the one that's disruptive in there. What signal does that send? We have handcuffed our teachers with any tool to address issues like that. And I think it goes to some of the deeper issues. And do you want to touch maybe on the school counselors that we're working on the funding, or?
Well, yeah, so Drew and I have been working really hard on mental health issues, and we know that mental health, poor mental health reduces the safety in the classroom and usually does cause a lot of these activities. And to that end, we're trying to make sure, and this budget does fund more mental health counselors or just guidance counselors and in our school system. But beyond that, we've partnered with Peninsula Community Health, which, if you haven't seen their model, they're amazing. They're a primary mental health, primary medical, primary pharmaceutical, and primary dental service that has found a way to be able to practice with on Medicaid and zero ability to pay. This is really important, and they've now just moved to Shelton, and we're hoping to open up that lifeline or that ability like they've done at North Mason in the north to make sure that we're treating that primary mental health issue. But I have to echo what Drew said. How many of you, if you were, you got up and started running around on your desks, how many of you remember the teacher just clearing the classroom and letting the kid run on the desk? Yeah, so we really have to use some common sense here to say that we have to directly engage the youth that's significantly misbehaving. And sometimes they do have developmental disabilities that cause it, and we need to understand that. So our policies have to be, as Drew said, we handcuffed them, but we also have to understand that sometimes with developmental disabilities, you can't just go up there and take them to the principal's office, because that interaction causes a worse reaction. So we have to be trauma informed on how we deal with it. The person that's just misbehaving to misbehave, we need to free our teachers so the teachers have an ability to manage that actively, but we also need to train them aggressively and have that mental health training in our schools to say, if it is autism spectrum disorder or some of those developmental disabilities, you're going to make it worse by engaging. So I guess I think it's harder to fix than just saying take the kid out of the classroom, but it could be as easy as just take the kid out of the classroom. So thank you.
I'd also like to point out on that and I don't know how this happened, but it's one of the things that just kind of slipped. And on a bipartisan basis, there's a huge commitment to fixing that, and that is that under the funding model that we have right now, the state will pay for one mental health counselor for what is the population of the entire grade school population in the state of Washington. That's not going to work. We need them in every school, right? And so there is a big bipartisan effort to address that and fix that. It doesn't happen overnight, but we are moving in that direction. And and I recognize society's changed. I mean, I remember when I was in fourth grade and little cocky, and I said something to my teacher, and he chased me down on the playground, tackled me, put me in a headlock, said, "Are you going to knock it off?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yes." And problem solved, right? Can you imagine doing that today? I mean, again, society's changed, in a lot of ways. But we've taken a lot of power away from the teachers, and you hear this all the time. And I think we need to re-empower our teachers in our local districts. And give them the ability and the tools to handle situations.
What are your opinions and policies towards climate change?
So reducing the amount of carbon that goes in the atmosphere is good for all Washingtonians. The way that the majority party is trying to deal with it right now, I believe, is going to get in the way of the end goal. We passed a bill, a supposed clean fuels bill. One of the things that the supporters forget to tell you, in clean fuels, it gets 20 to 30% less fuel economy than normal fuels. If you have to burn 20 to 30% more of the stuff, you're going to get a net same amount of carbon. But what if Washington State, if we were going to do one-off policy, what if we did something like Europe? What if we said, we're going to let innovators in Washington State do one of two things. Point carbon contamination, what we're doing now with catalytic converters and that sort of thing. So you do point carbon contamination and low carbon fuels. But what if we said we're going to set the innovators free and say, but we also are going to let people do all the good hard work on hyperfuel economy. If we're burning way less of the stuff, like they are in Europe, we're going to put way less CO into the environment. We're also going to put less our particulate carbon in the environment. And I think that would, if we're going to do one-off policy, wouldn't it be neat if we set innovators against each other to try to get the best policy and the best manufacturing type for the consumers? Because the consumers right now are craving hyperfuel economy. They'll pay for it. So if we set the innovators free instead of doing one-off policy that's actually going to do nothing but just make people feel good, I don't support that. I want direct carbon reductions, it also helps all of our economies. There's ways to do that too. We know the life cycle of a Doug fir tree. We know the life cycle of a hemlock tree and all the other major crop trees that we have in Washington State. We know how much carbon they sequester and absorb, and we know how long they absorb it for. We also know that at a certain age, we're about 38 years old, the Doug fir and the hemlock stops sucking up carbon and goes into just prevent mode. And we know that if we log it, we put good men and women in Washington State to work, and we sequester that carbon. And we know that if we replant it, that those little baby trees, that's all they want to do is they want to grow really fast to be as big as their parents, just like our children. And if we set our innovators free and our forest products, if we set our innovators free instead of choking them up with policies that we endorse that is not vetted by the engineer that designs those internal combustion motors, if we did those things, we would do direct carbon reduction, and they would all help each and every one of us by lowering costs instead of increasing costs, like the low carbon fuel standards would do. But those are some of my ideas, what I think we should do.
You know, when it comes to environment, everybody is for a clean environment, right? And then we get the political arguments on, because people have their narrative that they want to address it, and we have to get away from that. If we want to drive forward and reduce pollution, we have to be willing to embrace technologies that are working right now while we await better technologies that are coming that aren't yet proven. And a great example of that, frankly, is natural gas. We have an abundance of it in this nation and on the West Coast. And if we converted our commercial fleet in this state right now to natural gas, we'd have an immediate 20% reduction in carbon. That is more than any law or legislation that's been proposed in Olympia in the last 10 years. That would do more immediately than any of those bills have done. But there's this resistance to do anything. Well, it's a fossil fuel. Well, yeah, but you're getting 20% less than what you're getting right now. And we don't yet have all the technology. We've made a lot of advancements, certainly. But let's utilize what we have that is cleaner while we develop the other items that are going to provide more of a solution. I was a part of a state delegation a couple of years ago. I went to Denmark and Sweden, and you look at a lot of the things they do. I mean, some of it I was very intrigued by. Some of it I was like, holy cow, that's not going to fly here. But, you know, we have to be willing to look outside the box. And frankly, I think both sides of the argument when it comes to anything climate-related are so stuck in their own box, they're unwilling to look at other examples. And that trip was eye-opening in what they use and what they don't use. And, you know, don't buy into this sanctimonious argument, well, Denmark's perfect because they're, you know, all going all green. You know how they're paying for it? They're selling the crude oil in the North Sea to everybody else in the world. I mean, it's because they went through a financial crisis and realized, holy cow, we don't have the infrastructure to survive an economic downturn, so let's utilize our resource here and let's build up our own self-sufficiency. It was driven out of economics, not about the climate. The climate became a secondary benefit for them in that process, and they are now one of the leaders in that. But again, we need to be looking at everything that is out there and utilize what is working best right now and allow time for those other things to develop.
Since mental illness and drug addiction are big problems, and we talked about the surplus we have in the state, why not use that surplus towards treatment that is so badly needed?
So we're doing a lot of that. In the capital budget, we're building more mental health beds, and we're shifting away. We're trying to shift away from a top-down state-centric, where western and eastern states are bread and butter for mental health and treatment, to community treatment. So you can treat people in the community that they live, and they could be inpatient for a while, and then they could also have follow-up services in community. Because what we want to do is keep them in familiar ground, and being surrounded by those the loved ones that you have, friends and family. Your chances of recovering from your mental addiction, your mental health, or your addiction problem skyrockets. And so in that, you know, as a professional firefighter, we're frustrated all the time. As we'll, I like to talk, I tell you, I've said it many times. We get the gentleman that is intoxicated with no pants and peeing in the traffic on railroad. some people think that's funny, but it's not. But it happens. We take them up in Mason General because we don't have any other place to take them. And at Mason General, they sober up, and we get them some pants. And by midnight, the same person is drunk with no pants on, peeing in the street on railroad. So this never-ending circle has to stop. We're going to have detox centers that fire service can start and emergency responders can start bringing people to a detox center because they don't need to go to an emergency room. The emergency room isn't designed to do that. They're just basically babysitting them. But at the detox center, we also need to say if we take you there 3 times, you got a significant problem. And we're going to, for just a short period of time, say you're going to stay here. And we're going to give you the best chance at getting better because we're going to put you in 30 days treatment. Because 1 week isn't working, 72-hour holds aren't working. We have to change the policies. The kickback we get is ACLU says they have a right to do that. And I tell everybody, is it love to say, we're just gonna let you out after 72 hours to once again get drunk and fall asleep on the sidewalk and not be able to take care of yourself, or is it love to say we're going to drive the ship for a little while because you can't drive anymore because we love you? And I think that's where we're going. A lot of our money is going to community beds, community treatment, community detox, and look to more of those activities coming online in a very short time.
It's horrible, that addiction, and we have colleagues on both sides of the aisle that have family members that have dealt with this, and you hear some pretty gut-wrenching speeches on the House floor, again, from both sides. And we just had one a week ago or so. When we're increasing the funding for on-demand treatment, you get somebody to a point that says, I need help. My God, you can't wait 30 days to get pre-authorization and wait for a bed. No, if they're willing to go now, you got to get them in there, right? And so we're working towards that. And again, it's not going to happen overnight, but the legislature has realized we have got to improve that. And it's the same thing with mental health. I dealt with this within my family. When somebody finally needed help, it's kind of tough to get them there. We have a lack of availability there. So we are working towards finding better ways to fund that and have more providers there. That is a key component of it. Another key component is listening to guys like this that are on the street dealing with it nearly every day and what's working and what's not. And then there's a fine line. There's been proposals, that we should limit a doctor's prescribing authority. I don't know that that's the solution. If you're in a horrific car accident and you need painkillers, last thing you want to do is get a 3-day supply and have to go back to the doctor again and go through that whole ordeal. I mean, that increases the cost of health care, right? But there's a fine line in there somewhere where we've got to address that, and I think the medical community has stepped up tremendously in policing itself and how they're handling that. And I don't like having that top-down mandate that we often do on industries, but that is a component of it. But the biggest part of it is making sure that we have the treatment beds there when people need them.
This question is that our ferry fleet is getting old, and the super ferries that we have are many over 50 years old. So how can the state maintain service for our growing population without higher user fees?
Well, at this point in time, we just authorized the construction of the 4 more. So we did that 2 years ago. So our fleet is getting a lot younger. And one of the things we argued with the governor on is he, instead of building a whole, we could have got a 5th ferry, but he decided to hybridize 2 of the ferries that are already on the production line. And we're like, we have an inventory problem now, Governor, so we're doing the hybridization of the fleet. That is a good conversation to have, but it's exceptionally expensive, and it's exceptionally expensive to change now that we've already got them in the pipeline to be built. We're on a good path, I think, to replace the ferries. Our ferry replacement schedule is doing really well. I was a little disappointed. I just rode one of the brand new ones, and it looked like it was 80 years old. I mean, the decorations and everything that we did, I was like, wow. I was so excited to go on that brand new ferry, and I get on, and I'm thinking, when was this built? And I go look at the data plate, and I was like, wow, that was built 4 years ago. Look, postmodern Boeing office space, 70s era. Anyway, we could do a little better there, but I think we're in pretty good shape with the ferry fleet. We passed a lot of good bills on that. San Juan Islands is suffering a little bit right now because they had to take one of the boats offline. There is a push to try to get a replacement for that one to come soon, but more to come. I think we're pretty safe in our ferry fleet right now.
Yeah, boats are expensive. If you've owned one yourself, you know that. Boat stands for bring out another 1,000. Well, it's another million on a ferry easily. And there's a fine line again there between the user fee portion of it and how much is the state subsidizing it. And you talk to taxpayers that live east of the Cascades, they're not thrilled about subsidizing the ferry fleet, right? But we're one Washington, and we're in this together. It is a crucial component to the peninsula. And I think the thing that we have to be conscientious of, and whether it's a ferry or the Tacoma Narrows Bridge or the toll road issues in King County, you can't put people in a box where their only avenue to get to where they need to get, whether that's work, school, et cetera, is by having to pay a fee. So we got to be conscientious of how we do things. And, obviously if you choose to live on an island, you're a little limited in that component on, what you can do transportation-wise. But we also need to be smarter in how we build these. And I don't think the state's done a great job on that over the years. So, again, I'll go back to this trip to Denmark and Sweden that we did. The ferry system that they use there, vastly different. It's done with about a quarter of the crew than what we have here. We have some federal regulations. I'm not suggesting that we just get rid of 3/4 of a crew, but we've designed boats that require a lot more people. Let's look at different designs that don't require as many people to operate it, and that's a part of it too. So we have to be better in our designing and building of these.
So follow up on that one a little bit, and back to some of the other things you talked about, clean fuel standards, and what are the legislatures in the House and the Senate looking at towards incentivizing and making this like a competition? You hear about SpaceX and things like this, where the feds will put out, we'll give you $1 million for the best design to head off into space or something like that. Are there portions in the budget that allow for those types of competitive endeavors to happen?
We try. Last year, the House Republicans had a comprehensive carbon sequestration bill, and it was carrot-stick approach. Hold the carrot out in front of them, and as they're running to get the carrot, they're also doing the good things. We thought it was a better approach. It would help the environment. It would set the innovators free, and it would also have a spirit of competition with winners and losers, victors and the vanquished. So we do that a bit. And I think we need to do a lot more of that. I wish that bill would have passed. It gets to direct carbon sequestration way quicker than these bills that may feel good and may sound good, because clean fuel, that sounds great, but you got to look at the fine print to find out, well, clean fuel gets 20 to 30% less fuel economy if you got to burn 20 to 30% less of it, or more of it. Really, what are you gaining? So I really like to incentivize activities for business, and with the incentives, I think you get progress quicker, and you get a sense of competition, like the race to space and those sort of things. So I'd like to do more of it, and I hope that we can talk our colleagues into doing more of it. Thank you.
And I just add to that, the state has a tendency, the legislator, I should say, has a tendency to pick winners and losers, as Dan alluded to. And we'll say that it can only be done one way, and then we wonder why it gets so expensive. And we do that in transportation, healthcare, you name it. And the legislature needs to get away from that and have incentives out there, and let the free market go to work, and they'll do it. We actually probably passed a bill last week to incentivize the space economy.
Yeah.
It's here, and that's the way we need to do it. Get out of the way, and some are going to fail, and some are going to succeed, and that's going to get worked out. and we just got to get out of the way.
I got one more follow-up, just really quick. We passed a really exciting bill today that Rolls-Royce engine manufacturer, jet engine manufacturer, wanted to partner with Boeing on a 747 platform. And they could either go to Arizona or they could go to Washington. But the problem is, because it's really expensive to do that design testing, they said, hey, we'll come to Washington or consider coming to Washington if you eliminate the fuel tax while we're doing the testing here. It puts 1,500 to 1,000 people to work in Washington State. That's a perfect example of the things that we need to do more of and make sure that Washington State stays the aerospace king of the world.
This questioner says, I heard that the sex ed for kindergarten just passed out of committee today. Is this just a ploy to make kids comfortable with transgender issues?
Well, I don't see the stated goal in it. I will tell you it's a problematic bill on many levels. Having the biggest problem with the comprehensive sex ed bill is there's, the maker, OSPI, of the bill, or the author, says that parents can opt out of this comprehensive sex education that starts in kindergarten. But what comprehensive sex education is defined as is completely integrated and built into the curriculum. So how can they say that this is something that parents can opt out of and do on their own, if it is built into every piece of the curriculum in school? I don't support this bill for many reasons. One, about thousands of people have got a hold of my office already telling me they don't want it. I don't support it because it takes away parental choice and parental control. And I think it starts a subject matter at too young an age. I think kids should be kids, allowed to be kids a little longer than they do in this current society. I was allowed to be a kid for a long time. I think I was still considered a kid at 12 years old, and the magic of childhood, was not lost on me. But now I fear a 12-year-old is a relative adult in this society. And I want to push back on that a lot, because some of the old ways of doing things, they weren't bad. We don't need to just reinvent the wheel or just do something because somebody says that it needs to happen. No, we can push back and say we're not going to do that. I don't support this bill in any way, shape, or form, and I don't think there's a way it can be amended for me to support it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd echo those comments. This will be a floor fight. I don't know if it's going to pass. There's, I think, 4 bills that are going to be a floor fight, and what I mean by that is the debate goes on for a long time, and it's going to come down to what the majority party chooses to do, and which one they want to go on the Hill for, and we'll see. I don't support the bill. I think it'd be fair to say on the emails that I've gotten on it, it's probably, I'm off the top of my head, I'd say probably 5 or 6 to 1 against it. It's overwhelming, and for all the reasons Dan said, I think that we're trying to force something that I don't think kids are ready for at that age. So we'll see what happens.
What is being done about the drugs flowing into Mason and Kitsap counties from Mexico and the free airline ticket return to Mexico? Take either of them.
Well, we're not doing a lot of the free airline ticket return to Mexico any longer. Washington State now is a sanctuary state. That bill passed. I didn't vote for it, but we passed that bill. On the subject of immigration and drugs, I'll get to that as well. Those that want to come here and want to better themselves, the tired, huddled masses yearning to be free and give back to society, I want to be open arms with. But I'll tell you what, I've crusaded in Olympia for the last 6 years against sexual assault violence, ending the statute of limitations on felony sex crimes, making sure that we do all that we can to take care of those survivors. A tragic story happened in Seattle about 8 months ago. I was interviewed by several news media outlets because they know what my stance is. An illegal immigrant was raped a woman in Seattle and was caught. The police actually he was on top of her and caught this illegal immigrant. He did 8 months, and the judge released him on his own recognizance that he would go back to Mexico on his own. ICE would have taken him back to Mexico. And our sanctuary policies, we can have sanctuary policies. We can do it. I mean, we're in the minority, fine, we can have them. But we don't need to import monsters that injure people. We could certainly say in Washington State, we might be a sanctuary state, but we do not want those people that would do monstrous things to the people that, the good citizens of Washington State. It makes no sense to me that we would protect them. When it comes to illegal drugs, we have a very porous border problem that we really got to work out. How are we, if it's very easy to get in the United States? If it's what the president wants to build, or if it's virtual fencing or whatever, I mean, we've talked a lot about virtual fencing. We're going to have to really figure out the supply and demand issue and just stop it, because it's killing our kids. We tried the war on drugs, and that didn't seem to work. We spent billions of dollars. We're going to have to get smarter about how we do it, and I think the best way to be smarter is aggressively love the addicted people, treat them, get them back on their feet, so then they can be warriors with us against these terrible cartels that want to prey upon us. Thank you.
Yeah, well, needless to say, the immigration overall is a federal issue that we don't have a vote on. But I'll say this, that the feds need to fix this. That our immigration system is broken. I am all for legal immigration, and we need workers, and it's how this country was built. And I completely empathize with kids that were brought here by no choice of their own illegally. That is a tough spot, and I am very sympathetic to that situation. And in fact, I've done legislation that addresses some of that and that provides some protections. I think that's one category. And what Dan's referring to, the governor has mandated through executive order and then also through legislation that's been passed that our law enforcement can in no way cooperate with immigration authorities. So I'm not going to call him a gentleman, the thug that Dan was referring to, we could not inform immigration of his non-legal immigration status, and here he's committed horrendous crimes and then put back out on the street. And that's an issue. We can't operate as a functional society when you can't enforce the law. So I don't support that. And the feds, though, Congress needs to act. They need to fix our immigration policies, and then we need to enforce them. So as to the drug issue, I think that was part of the whole thing. We, as a state, we don't. Again, that goes to a federal issue. As a state, we've never paid for people to go back. I think we've told people they can, or that they should, but we don't. To my knowledge, the state's never paid for anybody, and I would be shocked to find out if they did. So again, I think we need to continue to put pressure on Congress to act.
I forgot the rest of that story. The person that the judge released after he got out of his 8-month sentence for brutally raping a disabled woman in a wheelchair, he went to her house and beat her with an inch of her life instead of going back to Mexico. I think we can have the stated majority party sanctuary policies, but we can also say there is a federal immigration system that is totally willing to take the monsters out of our society. We don't need to import monsters. We need to import those good people that want to come to this country and fix it up, help us do better.
This question asks, what is being done about people driving without or fake driver's license, insurance, VIN numbers, license plates. Is there anything that can be done? I added that last part, but assume also that they don't pay taxes either. Anything that the state can do on those?
Well, if you've just renewed your driver's license, you see you have a new one. So those of you that had memorized your driver's license number, it's different now, right? You used to be able to say, what was my last name, my first 2 digits, and then a few numbers, easy to go. So we've revamped it. They're very hard now, very, very hard to fake. So fake IDs are getting harder to do. On the VINs, whether you like it or not, it's a little bit a big government issue, but most police cars right now can actually scan your car license as you're going down the road. And if it doesn't belong to a blue Saturn or a blue Ford F-350, it's pretty easy for the troopers to pull them over and ask them why you got the wrong license plate on your car. So those are 2 things that are being done currently, and I think they're pretty effective.
Yeah, and the Real ID Act, which is a federal law, we're finally going to comply with it. So that's why we're having the driver's license change, which will address a lot of that. But the other part of it's enforcement, and that's something that needs to be done by law enforcement, and I believe that they are. Doesn't mean that you get everybody, but I'm not aware of a law enforcement officer that chooses not to write a ticket for somebody not having insurance, et cetera. So.
This question is for you, Representative MacEwen. The questioner says, you said on the radio, thanks for listening, caring for homeless is a moral responsibility. I don't think Mason County can handle the problem without state help, and what can be done?
Yeah, well, in the budget that was passed out of appropriations last night, a significant amount of money is going towards that. Yeah, we do have a moral obligation to help those that cannot help themselves, and I do believe in that. And there's a number of things that cause that. One medical issue can easily set a family backwards financially, and in cases put them out of their home, and that is a tragedy. And you have issues like that occur. You also have the other side of this equation, which is it's darn expensive to build an affordable home in this state. Mark knows this. I mean, it's upwards of 5 figures before you even move dirt to get a house going. That's not acceptable. So we've got 2 things going on here. We need to identify sooner when people are struggling and give them that helping hand up, so hopefully they don't end up on the street. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper to help somebody in a situation where, especially on the medical side, where something's happened, to get them that help that's needed to stabilize them out so that they can stay in their home. I mean, everybody wants to stay in their own home, right? And then we have the other side of this where, why is it so expensive? And I'll tell you what, after this summer, it's going to be another $10,000 to $15,000 to build a home because of the way the Building Code Council is changing the energy code, which isn't going to have anything to do with improving the energy efficiency of your home. And we wonder why it's not affordable. We put study after study on permit and after permit, and again, upwards of 5 figures before you even start nailing boards together that is spent, and you wonder why it's not. They wonder why it's not affordable. So we've got to get out of this mandate system. We have to revamp the Growth Management Act. That was written in 1991 when the state's population was a little over 4 million. Today it's over 7.5 million, and the GMA has never really been readdressed. And communities like this, we are hampered by our ability to grow outside of an urban growth area. When you're stuck with only being able to go on 5 acres, that does not make it affordable. We have got to be able, and if you go out McGreevy, and where Bald Eagle is, and all those houses that are there, with the changes that have happened to the state law, you can never do a development like that in this area. There is no way you could. You would not be in compliance with a number of state rules, and much less the Hearst issues with water. So we've got to address both sides of this. We've got to be more efficient in identifying issues, and the state, can help the counties with resources. There's a number of things that are happening in the state budget that are going to help provide relief on that. But again, it's not overnight, and we've got to address the affordability side of this so that people can feel safe and be in a home that they can afford.
What I'd like to do is build more group supportive housing, and we know that people that are suffering from substance and mental issues do well being in peer support arenas. We know that in the fire service, when we were dealing with stressful issues, we went through this whole thing, CISD. It was a tortuous thing where we would have to tell this professional doctor person who was convening a group of us that all just experienced a traumatic event. It was more painful to do that. We found out that if we were able to tell our painful story to our peers and work through a peer support network, that we actually recovered and we didn't have more trauma. When it comes to the group supportive housing, we know that they can talk to each other, they can have life's experience sharing, and it's less expensive to build group supportive housing. But as Drew was just talking about, 375,000 units and climbing shortage in the actual basic need right now for housing. And we put ourselves in that position, Washington did, by passing the Growth Management Act. You look all around Mason County, does it look like we're land poor? We are not land poor. We have lots of land, but we are land poor when it comes to land that we're allowed to build on. Our commissioners are struggling right now, county commissioners are struggling right now to find a way to do land trades and working within current law to say we have builders that want to build land, build houses. We have manufacturing businesses and all kinds of industry that would like to come to Mason County because of our assets that we have. But all this land that we have, because of GMA, we can't use any of it. And we're getting to the point in time where the buildable lands inventory, because, look at Allen, it's an urban growth area, it's building like crazy, man. I can't, I live there and I can't believe how many houses we have. If we don't strictly and closely scrutinize the GMA and allow for some variances and allow for more land to be put into buildable, we're going to struggle as a state. We have to build housing, because if you're homeless and you can hand out all the housing vouchers, Washington State spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on housing vouchers, but I just told you we have 375,000 house shortage. You can hand out all the housing vouchers you want, and people still wait in a line with their voucher in hand for 6 to 8 months, sometimes a year, before they can get into housing. So we're going to have to break the floodgates open on this housing inventory problem and start actually building houses. I think there's a place for nonprofit housing with our Habitat for Humanity and the Kitsap housing group that's building some housing here in Mason County. I think there is also room to reduce some of the regulatory burdens and the tax burdens on those that are going to build housing that will stay in Section 8 housing rent prices. We can do a lot of those things, but if we don't build the housing and we don't build those group community centers, which I think we're moving really fast towards, we're not even going to make a dent in our homelessness problem.
Representative Griffey, the Public Safety Committee met today on the Senate death penalty bill. Was there a vote? How did you vote? And then Representative MacEwen, you can give your thoughts on that.
There was a vote today. I voted no on eliminating the death penalty as an option. Not that I think the death penalty is something that we should probably ever do again, but it is, when you look at Gary Ridgway, he believed that we would execute him, and he wanted to live. And they were only going to charge him with 4 murders that they could connect him to, and Gary Ridgway actually took the law enforcement officers to all of the dumping grounds. And they were able to give closure to the family members of the Green River Killer. We happen to serve with the family members of the Green River Killer, and it's gut-wrenching to hear her stories. She's actually in the office right next to me. So I voted no. I believe there is a pathway to yes, and that pathway to yes is we're trying to get a referendum vote tagged onto the bill to where all of you get to weigh in on such a important decision You send us there to be your representatives, and at this point in time, this one voted no. But I might vote yes when it gets to the floor if they allow for a referendum vote where all the people of Washington State can make up their minds on it. Oh, and it passed out of committee this morning.
Yeah, I find it interesting that we're using legislative time, frankly, on this issue, especially in a short session, because the governor, I think it was in 2014 or 15, put a moratorium on any further executions in the state. So on one hand, that took care of that as long as he was going to be governor. And then, it all runs together. Last year, 2 years ago, the state Supreme Court ruled it as unconstitutional. So you can't sentence them anymore. And so, but we still have the law in the book. So this bill is to codify the law, frankly, with the Supreme Court's ruling. And I suppose on one hand we should, that's a worthy discussion to have as to whether or not it's worth codifying it with the court ruling or not. But I think it's frankly a waste of legislative time right now to be dealing with that in a short session. But it's here, passed out of the committee. My thought on it, it's evolved over the years. If you had told me 20 years ago that I was even thinking on which way to vote, I would have said you're crazy, because I was always very much in favor of it. But I look at it from the standpoint today that, one, it's not going to happen anymore in this state anyway. I believe in the principle of it, but I have serious reservations about the application of it as a society. And so I don't know yet. I don't know how I'm going to vote on that. I will vote, if that comes to the House floor. But I also take a pro-life view from birth onwards. So, that weighs for me heavily. And again, my thinking on it's evolved over the years. So we'll see. It's something that I'll have to decide between now and then. And but on one hand, the consequences of how that legislation, whether it passes or not, is somewhat irrelevant with both the governor's executive order and the Supreme Court's ruling.
One of the last questions we have here is something we talked about a little bit. It's House Bill 1110, the Clean Fuel Standards. So again, cover a little bit some of the objections that you may have with them and how you plan to address the greenhouse gas pollution in our state.
Well, I talked a lot about the Clean Fuel Standard. The Clean Fuel Standard is not going to do what it says it's going to do. Yes, the tailpipe emissions will reduce CO and particulate matter in a fraction. The problem is you have to burn a lot more of the stuff. The way I would like to tackle the CO that we have in the environment is through win-win propositions. One, we really need to, the best way to deal with carbon is to sequester it. And we know exactly how much, we know how many tons of carbon a Doug fir tree absorbs, because that and the nutrients in the soil is their food. We need to partner with our forest products folks to do regular rotations, regular harvests, because a tree that is cut down that carbon is now sequestered forever inside that tree. And we know the carbon cycle of the trees, and we know that at about 38 to 40 years, they stop sequestering carbon. A lot of people thought that it was bad idea and terrible for the environment that we would cut our trees down. Well, we got a double whammy. Because we're not cutting the trees down, and we're not managing our forests. Our forests are all choked up, and we have rampant wildfire problems, which puts a lot more carbon than even our cars do into the atmosphere on our very active wildfire seasons. But if we cut them down and we actively manage the forest and we replant on regular rotations, we are sequestering that carbon and we're absorbing that carbon. When it came to, I told you about my ideas. I think if we're going to have one-off state policies like a clean fuel, you need to set the innovators free to work on, co-pathways or diverging pathways. What does hyperfuel economy look like? How do you design an internal combustion engine to get hyperfuel economies? Well, if the state knew anything about, like I do, about how the internal combustion engine works, you know that choking it down as we do with catalytic converters and those sort of things, and putting alcohol, doing alcohol supplements to our fuel only makes them run worse, doesn't make them run better, and and they have worse fuel economy. We have a problem in government, especially federal government, of telling innovators how to meet a number, not a number that they need to meet. Diesel exhaust fluid is diesel regeneration, on and on and on, that our regulators told engineers and manufacturers how to build them, instead of saying, here's a number we would like you to get to, say 70 miles to the gallon. They could do that if we set them all free to do that. Thank you.
This is, California did this, and their own, I forget what their agency is that does review of the impact of legislation. Their own state agency that reviews it, though, in Reader's Digest version said that it has had a zero impact on carbon emissions in the state of California, but has increased fuel costs exponentially. And that's exactly what will happen in our state. We're going to have a zero impact on the carbon emissions because you're going to have to burn more of it because it's got less oomph to it, and you're not going to reduce that pollution, and you're going to increase the cost per gallon to roughly another 37 cents. Who in here thinks our fuel's cheap? We're number 2 in the state, or in the nation. Washington's number 2 in the nation for the gas tax. You're going to get another 37 cents roughly added onto that through this low carbon fuel standard, and that's not money going to build roads. That's just sort of the cost of doing this new fuel. That's going to have a zero impact on our environment. So again, there are other solutions that we can do that have a meaningful impact, and that we should look at. But there's been a one-sided view on pushing this forward, and it's not going to have the result that they've wanted. And we always, we being in the legislature, always like to, for some reason, look at, well, California did this. Okay, they did, but let's look at what they said after they did it. Why don't we read the follow-up on that one? Because by their own admission, it's not working.
Question I have on the topic of the coronavirus that's been worldwide, and we had our first case in the nation was here in Washington, and Bothell High School is going to be closed for a clean down up there. It's really put the markets at jittery the last couple of days, and I just kind of wonder where you guys and what you hear about in the halls there in Olympia.
Well, it's certainly it's scary because it's new, and when you don't fully understand something, that creates fear. I just keep in mind that the quote regular flu epidemic has killed more people and will kill more people than the coronavirus. The problem with it, as you know, if you've read the news, that you can't, somebody can be carrying it and have no symptoms of it, and so it's hard to isolate the transmission of it because people can be carrying it for upwards of 14 days and show no signs of it and pass it on to others. So as a state, checked with the healthcare authority today, because this came out of California where they had their first case, where which is a real concern because it was somebody that had not traveled and did not have any close contacts with folks that had traveled to any of the known areas where it's been an issue, but now this individual has the virus. So that's a big concern. And what California has seen is that they didn't have a very high number, a good number of tests. There's a particular test kit and I am no expert on this. I'm going off of what I've been told, but there's a particular test kit that's done to diagnose the coronavirus. It's my understanding we don't have any of those in the state, so that's an issue. The Bothell school, I think, was a I don't want to second guess them. I know what happened.
A family of a staff member or something like that.
And I think they did that out of an abundance of caution, and I'm not going to fault them for that because, God forbid, they ended up with an outbreak you know what the response would have been? Well, you knew that so-and-so's family member had it, and you didn't do anything about it. So I understand why they closed down and are doing that cleaning. It's out of an abundance of caution, and it probably makes sense in the current environment. But this is going to work its way through. It's going to take a couple months. Europe is seeing it. We are seeing it in the United States, and I think unfortunately it'll get a little bit worse before it's going to get better. But I think China has peaked. They're not out of the woods, but the growth rate has stalled out. They're still dealing with it, of course. And it's something that's going to work its way through. We'll get through it, but I would encourage people just to have I don't want to invoke fear, but take the necessary precautions. And part of that's having adequate supplies. So if we do have an outbreak, you don't have to go out in public, and you're well stocked. And I would just encourage people to do that. And again, I'm not trying to invoke fear, but just take necessary precautions to, if we have an issue, that you can minimize your exposure to other people.
So what we heard, coronavirus, this one, the one that we're dealing with now, because there's many coronaviruses. This is just and I don't remember the number. They number them all. They have to do that because they know numbers are hard for me to remember. I know titles better. So it originated, it jumped from animals to humans in a live wild animal market in China. And that's why it spread so quickly. And then it's 80% of those that get the virus have simple cold-like symptoms. They might spike a fever for a couple of days and their body fights it off. A small percentage, about 15%, have more moderate symptoms to where they get congestion in the chest and lots of coughing and that thing, and they do well. And about 5% of the population has the air sacs in their lungs fill up with fluid, and that fluid cannot be removed. And those are the most critical patients, and those are the ones that we're worried about, and those are the ones that are dying from it. The alarming thing is our antiviral drugs that we've developed, and we've developed several of them, aren't working on this virus. That's alarming. The thing that shouldn't alarm us is the virus is easily killed by good hand washing. So if you want to be prepared, just make sure you wash your hands very well. If you see somebody actively coughing, stand about 15 feet away from them. You don't, even if they're actively coughing and they have the normal cold, you don't want that. Use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. The CDC says that 60% alcohol hand sanitizer will kill almost anything. Just take some precautions and don't worry too much. The flu in the United States is going to kill way more people than the coronavirus will globally kill. The overreaction to these type of threats is really a problem. We hear about it all my commute. I listen to the Dave Ross show every morning when I'm commuting to work, and I'm hearing corona, and I even feel myself going, gosh, I should worry, and I think about it, and then I have to calm myself down. We've dealt with these things before. It's a virus. It's a virus that 5% of the population that gets it are going to get something that's going to be very complex to treat and could pass away from. But we also know that the flu that we deal with every year is going to kill more people worldwide than this virus is going to kill. So remember, wash your hands, stay away from people that are coughing, and you'll do good things to make sure that the United States doesn't help spread this virus around.
Well, this legislative session will end in 2 weeks' time now, and you'll have another opportunity to talk with both Representative Griffey and MacEwen, along with State Senator Tim Sheldon, in a kind of wrap-up, I believe, in April with the EDCs and the chambers. I want to thank you guys for being here tonight, and I want to thank everybody here for offering questions and listening to what's been going on here. So thank you very much, and have a great night.